Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the greatest threat to mankind is probably the amount of oil on Peter's hair this morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be at EAT again. Was I at the first one?
No, that was a zero-emission conference.
Oh, okay, same sort of thing, though. What the fuck, you know. Ladies and gentlemen, this seems to have been a long time ago, what you've just seen, but daily today we live with the famines in East Africa. We now know what that is. Back in the 80s, we thought it was something called desertification that existed just unto itself. And very rapidly, we learned that it was a phenomenon called climate change that was occurring. And we've been attempting to struggle with that. And as we saw in America recently, we still attempt to diagnose what it is and what causes it, and to believe in that. Well, we've diagnosed what it is. We know what causes it, but some of us still don't believe what's happening. The greatest threat to the planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And as with Trump, when political will is lacking, then civil will must affect the transition itself. So how do you do that? How do you create something out of nothing, something that is essentially relatively boring for people to understand, something that doesn't seem to impact them on a daily basis? Intellectually, they know about it, but it's not affecting them. I have to tell you, if you live in the Horn of Africa, you genuinely understand what is happening, what its effect is, and you desperately wish for some sort of concerted global political action to stop it. Well, we don't do that. Why? We can move the marker slightly left or right politically. We can create vast issues of civil will, and we have new tools to do that. But how often do they work, and have they changed since we decided to do this back in 1984? Now, I've been doing this sort of thing since I was a kid. When I was 13 in school, I started with a friend of mine, the Anti-Apartheid Movement, as soon as I understood what was happening in South Africa, through listening to my pop idols, through listening to Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones, turning me on to rhythm and blues, and Dylan turning me on to the writing of James Baldwin. And I couldn't really understand why an entire people were suborned, were considered less human, were disenfranchised, dehumanized, because they happened to have a different skin color. It seemed intellectually absurd to me that that should be so. And so at 13, in school, we started this little thing, and gradually it grew. And we had a march of 60,000 people on the streets of Dublin that summer, and I got the policeman to smack me over the head with a baton, and so I was cool. I was so cool. It hurt, but I was cool. And we stopped the South African rugby team from coming to play in Ireland, which was probably the main animus for my anger in the first place, because they were going to beat the Irish, but we stopped them from playing, so everything was great. I then joined the campaign for nuclear disarmament. I shared a bedroom with my dad. He had a big bed over on the left-hand side of the room, and I had a single bed on the right. And he would kneel down every night to say his prayers before going to bed. And I prayed to the God that was behind my bed on the wall. It was a great, big, giant black and white poster with chalky ink. I can feel it and taste it now. And it was a picture of a nuclear explosion, that great, beautiful mushroom cloud with just a single word, no. No has been my animus throughout my entire life. I respond and react to things. And it went from there. I was working on an underground newspaper in Canada in 1972, and I went with Paul Watson, that genius of early Greenpeace, who bought a trawler boat and went out up to the Arctic from Vancouver to stop the Japanese whalers. And on one journey, I was with him, and I was in those little dinghies that ran across the Japanese whaling ships and got between them and the whales to stop them killing them. And it's thrilling It's thrilling to perceive something as a grave threat. It's thrilling to examine yourself and where you stand on this, but even more thrilling to try and persuade others that this not may be great and that this can change. Now, change comes from anywhere. We're buffeted by change the whole time. It's how we navigate and negotiate it that makes our lives. And change can be good or bad, but it is only good when it is balanced and meets the needs of society, the requirements of society. What you try and do in this conference is to take something that is existential, the collapsing health systems and food systems and climate systems and environmental systems of the world, and channel that into a single policy view. And that's what's required, because this issue that you deal with is so amorphous. It takes into account where we are precisely at the beginning of the 21st century. But it has to battle against seemingly other enterprises. I can't see a difference between what you talk about, food, sustainability, climate, water, and all these things. It is one issue. The global population and the global economy have burgeoned to such an extent that it has already pushed at the finite resources of this planet. Now, while we sit in this room and talk about that, that's thrillingly dangerous. We get a frisson of fear, an intellectual fear too, that unless we transmute this fear into some sort of political action, then we're not going anywhere, this species, this little ball of ours. Woody Allen has, as ever, a wonderful and typically mordant joke. Woody says, "Never before in the history of mankind have we faced such a crossroads. Down one road leads despair and utter hopelessness, and down the other, complete extinction. Let us hope we have the wisdom to choose wisely." That's what this conference is about. Choosing wisely. If we're going to be extinct, let's go for despair and utter hopelessness. I'm comfortable in despair. There needs to be, obviously, clearly, political awareness, and there needs to be a policy to make that happen. But there needs to be some sort of mass public awareness that pushes that, a civil will that will push the political will towards a finite end. Now, campaigns, in my opinion, and I know Matt Freud was here talking about communication earlier, and he and I worked together on several things, including Band-Aid, including Live Aid, including the One campaign. So he talked about communication. But for me, it seems that for a campaign, a structured organization that illuminates people and gets them fired up enough to go the distance with you to a political resolution. And the only way to resolve this is by utilizing the agents of change. If you want change, you must connect with the agents of change. And the agents of change in our world, for good or ill, are our political representatives. But they will not move unless they are obliged to. So how do we do that? Now, everyone says the web, that's the way to go. No, the web is just one small component, and indeed a lesser component, in the age-old tricks of campaigning. There has never been a moment or a successful campaign where there isn't some emblematic figure at the center of the campaign. It can be Mandela, it can be Gandhi, it can be William Wilberforce, when unbelievably he got rid of slavery. The British economy was entirely based on the notion of slavery. And this man from the Midlands of Britain took 20 years to have it passed in Parliament that slavery would be abolished, and that the Royal Navy, instead of escorting the slaving ships, now sank any ships that were slavers and returned the slavery to Africa. It's an extraordinary model of something that needed to be done and was done. And it took an entire economy to be turned around. That's probably not viable today, but it is what you're asking. because the system that we've set up, and I've talked to Peter and Goodhit a lot about this, the system mitigates against what you want to do. So if there is to be change, real change, as opposed to coming to Scandinavia every year and talking about this, it does need a central focus, a central point. And the figures show you that it's a mix of all the media out there. That seems self-evident. But then people say, well, look at Trump and his use of Twitter. It's an amazingly effective tool. Well, Eisenhower had radio, Kennedy had television, Obama had Facebook, Trump has Twitter. It's just one more medium. That's it. And it requires a specific gearing to make it operate successfully. But if you're in the commercial business, I'll just go through some figures from 2012 in the University of Pittsburgh. If you want to sell something, traditional media will give you a unit of publicity. Traditional media will give you 900 new sales and 400 sales to existing customers. A blog will give you 90 new sales and 63 to existing customers. An online mention is the weakest of all. 99 sales and 48 from people who are following you anyway. And this is my experience. I do business as well. This is my experience. I don't do any online media myself. I don't do Facebook, I don't do Twitter, fuck it bores me, But, you can't follow me, not that I would have any followers too, but I'm just not interested in that. Trust, and this is at the center. This is why I say there has to be a point of view articulated by a central figure with a positive, achievable end. People will only come with you if they trust you, if they trust the issue and they trust your resolution towards that issue. In traditional media, 71% of the population trust newspapers. Who'd have believed it? 70% trust cable news, 64% trust network news, blogs, online forums are trusted by only 34%, and more amazingly, social networks are only trusted by 36%. So if you've got Facebook followers, only 30, even if it's peer-to-peer, I like, therefore you like, only 36% of your followers trust your opinion, enough to be interested in it. So what it needs to be is compounded of everything that's out there. There seems to be 3 stages in a campaign. There's origination, and we were talking about this last night. You need to create some sort of shock the system message. So in our case, with Band-Aid, it was created by Michael Burke's work of genius, his report on the 1984 famine, where he stumbled across these people sitting in a field waiting to die. He didn't know they were there. He was on his way to the north of Ethiopia to cover a different story, the Civil War story, the longest-running war of the 20th century. And here he came across this epic famine, which he said was of biblical proportions. I was home that night when it was broadcast, and for various reasons I responded to it in a certain way. What I'd forgotten was that, of course, in the days of monomedia, 2 channels, the entire country saw the BBC 6 o'clock news. And when I said something about it the next day on the radio, the response was overwhelming. So you need to create a shock the system message. What is the shock the system message of EAT? What is it about health? How is it going to affect people? Yes, you can show a field full of people in mortal agony. Dying of hunger is extremely painful. They sit there without the energy to moan or cry often. But when you go there, the smell of famine, the sound of it, the flies, the soft moaning, nobody cries. There isn't enough water in the system. So that came across And how then do you carry that forward? Because the basis of a campaign is something that is finite. Come with me, and we will go there. I can't go there by myself, but together we can get to this point. We can achieve this end. Now, hunger is easy. Give me a pound, give me a euro, give me a kroner, give it to me, and I will get it to somebody who's hurting. I will. And I will show you the direct causal link of responsibility between you and them. Now, charity is a much overused and possibly derided word. It isn't. It is the manifestation of empathy, of one human being seeing another hurt and saying, no, let me give you a hand. And the most that we can do is to put a pound, a yen, a buck, whatever, into the pot. That's the most. But it is the most magnificent. Not to do so, not to see another person, another human being in pain, and knowing you can help, and you don't, and something inside you dies. But beyond that, it is profoundly political, because I can put my pound into the Oxfam box, but if 1 million of us do it, then I got the numbers, and politics is only numbers. So at Live 8, all we wanted was the numbers. Live Aid, we wanted the money. But we showed them with the amount that we got, which was at the time about $150, $180 million in one day. We showed them. We got the trucks, we got the food, we got the boats, and we showed them the direct causal link. So there was an achievable goal which was arrived at, and they felt not only a sense of validation and victory, but a sense of what it is to be human. And we were able to take them on a long, dull journey of 20 years to Live 8, because now we had to translate the frisson, the emotional payoff, the excitement of seeing that the world sometimes does work if it's cooperative. And it's boring to translate famine into long-term development. How do you do that? But once we'd achieved for them the first victory of keeping as many people alive as possible, they were prepared to come, many less than the millions who helped for Band-Aid and Live Aid, but enough, and political awareness, and a new generation came to politics, Blair, Clinton, Schroeder, who were called Live Aid babies. And we had political access because we had the numbers. And we were able to write a huge portion of the 2005 G8 agenda, the cancellation of debt, fundamental structural issues, $50 billion worth of aid per annum, which incidentally, for the poorest continent in the world is nothing. Europe, the richest continent, gets far more than $50 billion worth of aid. The system simply doesn't work. And then trying to continue it beyond that, that's a struggle. When you two were on tour, myself and Bono set up after, or before Live 8, we set up the One campaign, which would utilize his celebrity in particular, and mine in a much more minor way, the fucker. Hey, he's small and fat, and, so win some, lose some. Where we could access, where we had policy, we could create policy with these experts who worked for us, and had access and could try and implement it, partially successful. But I remember one meeting with Condoleezza Rice, and you two were going on tour. And Bono said, what happens if I get 80,000 people to call the White House every night and demand this? So you have a daily lobby of 80,000 people. And Condi said, how many do you think will respond? And Bono said, if I asked them, 80,000 people every night. And she just paused and she said, we can handle that. Now, it's far better to deal with people who tell you exactly what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. Angela Merkel will always say exactly what she's going to do and what she's not going to do. And it may be very different to her speeches. But she's just going to say, I can't do that. Well, we'll go out and campaign against you. I can't do it. So if you get to that point, that happy point of access to the policymakers, you must start with the numbers. A message that will shock the system. That's the first point. Then amplification of that message. How do you get that out there? Well, all campaigns are a feedback loop of media. I doubt very much whether you can get a shock the system message out on the web. It's too diffuse. In fact, in my view, the web is one of the greatest tools for authority than it is for civic society. Because each person in this room, you're all concerned with this issue, but let's park this issue and think about other things that concern you. We all probably have a different idea in our head about what should happen with the world or what bugs you about certain things. We could all go online now and go to our followers. And in 1 hour, let's say we all have 1,000 people saying, yes, I agree with you. That's easy for authority. They can divide and say, okay, we'll take that because that's easy, that's part of our policy, we can go there, we can do that. And it feels like there's direct democracy. But it's bullshit. They've just divided opinion. If all of us have the same idea and we go online now, then each of us with our 1,000 followers are figures, are numbers. And then you have access, and then you can drive the policy. But the message must be amplified through traditional media. Brexit. I couldn't stand what was happening. Brexit was like catnip, was like cocaine for the web, just all its lies, which just went out, unfiltered, unquestioned, unargued. And people believed this nonsense, or not. Brexit was an emotional spasm. But they wanted to believe that nonsense that was being said. And in frustration, 3 weeks before the end, I raised £120,000. We started putting up posters, funny posters, ones that were, not agitprop, but, people would look at them and laugh, and then they'd take pictures of it and put it online. I did a couple of movies called Sexit, the movie. And this got the front page of The Sun, grubby anti-Brexit gang and filthy pictures. Yeah, because young people would watch it and they'd just laugh and post it on. And so it got onto the front page of the mainstream papers. It was then covered by television. Once it breaks into the mainstream, once you become the news itself, that amplification of message. But it still needs... It cannot be amorphous. It still needs the individual. And so in a final desperate lunge at credibility, I hired a big boat and went down the Thames and tried to stop Nigel Farage coming up the river to park outside Parliament. And so we had the Battle of the Thames, But it does require individual commitment over the long term so that people can believe in you and your conviction and your idea. Sometimes a sort of charisma appears that isn't yours naturally. You just have an idea that others pick up on. In the case of famine, I just said, let's do this. And my fellow workers in song said, I'll come with you. And people then began to trust, and we delivered. Shock the system message, amplification, and then reinforcement of that. You must go out individually, personally. I know it's not your thing, but if you want this to happen, posters, you see it on the street. Don't put too much glue on it so that kids can take it off and put it up on their wall like I did. Keep moving on this, but have a definite positive end that is achievable within a short space of time, because they don't have the patience in the web age to stay with you. None of us are William Wilberforce anymore. We don't have 20 years to go. It must be done rapidly. So for this group, and particularly for Gunhild, who bothers about this all the time, It needs to be short, it needs to be sharp, it needs to be achievable and deliverable, and give people their victory, and then they will come with you on the next round. People can't see the issue you're talking about. They're bored by climate change. But ladies and gentlemen, when the land starts drying up, when water becomes a trickle, when the health systems are collapsing and taxes are raised to pay for new ones, when national shorelines, not international, national shorelines are being swamped by a rising ocean, then they listen. But then it's too late. And finally, the one ingredient, it's commonplace. The one thing you need to do this is to forget everything else almost, your personal life, your daily, quotidian problems. Because if you genuinely believe it, if people are to believe you, then everything must go, and you must have one solid thing in your head, a total commitment to what it is you want to achieve. And I pulled this out of my pocket because it was sent to me during Live Aid in 1985, when I was very tired and I was very frightened, because this thing that I'd seen on television and just responded to the next day had become too big for me, I thought. Margaret Thatcher was calling me, Rupert Murdoch was calling me. One, I didn't want to speak to them, but two, I knew I had to, you know. So all this was too much. And I was on television and somebody saw that I was very, very tired and very worried. And he sent me a letter. I got a lot of letters, Bob Geldof England letters, and they came to my door. And in it was this. I threw away a lot of them, but this guy said, I saw you on TV last night. He said, you look very tired and worried. He said, I've been in the same place, but for different reasons. And he said, I'm going to send you this quote, which I found useful, and I think it might help you. It did help me. And I have it up in the kitchen where I work at home. I don't want to go to an office, and it's pinned up on my cupboard. And for these sort of events, this is useful because it reminds myself, as well as everybody else, the one thing that is required for anything in your life, but certainly for a campaign. This is what a man called W.H. Murray says about commitment. Murray was, bizarrely, a Scottish mountaineer from the 1950s. But he got it right. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too, fate, then fate moves too. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. And Murray finishes with that wonderful couplet from the great German poet Goethe. Goethe says, whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Ladies and gentlemen, we need boldness, we need genius, we need power, but most of all, right now, in this world, we need a lot of magic. Thank you very much.